helping you with Acorn and RISC OS computing.
And thank you everyone for joining. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Steve Revill from RISC OS Open, and I've been kindly invited to speak a little bit tonight about the Moonshot, the 64-bit work. Very briefly, I'll touch on that anyway. And then I'll talk a bit about some of the work that I've been doing that's actually doing some coding, which is a very pleasant change. So I have been working on BBC Basic, and I have been working on some software called LanManFS. So first of all, just as a bit of a recap of what the Moonshot is all about, hopefully you can see this logo. This is essentially Rule trying to galvanize support for RISC OS to develop itself into the future. And there's a lot of work happening in and around the community to tackle some of the issues that we face with future ARM chips not supporting RISC OS natively. So we've got people working on building RISC OS on top of Linux, building RISC OS on top of emulators, even writing their own operating systems that are inspired by RISC OS. And all of those efforts are very useful and interesting efforts in their own right. And what Rule is doing in particular is looking to see if we can raise funding towards doing professional level development on moving RISC OS forwards. And some of that involves reaching into the community, and some of it involves reaching outside of the community. And in the background, we're also trying to chivvy along various little projects that actually work on the code as well. And I'll be talking about some of them. But the main thing is seeing if we can inject a significant amount of cash into the efforts in order to hire developers. Because without a lot of commitment of time from very good developers, it's very hard to do all of the huge amount of work that needs to be doing to move RISC OS out of where it currently is to being able to run on modern ARM chips. So just very briefly, this work is all about 64-bit. So that basically means the ARM chips that we all know and love in the historical RISC OS computers are all typically 32-bit, some of them even 26-bit in the olden days. But now ARM is increasingly building chips that don't even have 32-bit mode in them. So in order to run RISC OS on them, you would need to rewrite all of the code that's written in 32-bit ARM into 64-bit ARM code, and that is a huge amount of work. We estimated it could take a team of people, 5-10 years even, to do all of the programming that needs doing. There are shortcuts you can take, and I've talked about some of them in the past with emulation or leaning on running on top of another operating system. But to do it purely with RISC OS is a vast amount of work. And most of that work, we believe, is rewriting all of the stuff that's written in handwritten ARM assembler in higher level languages like C. And that means you can recompile C to run on any different type of chip that you want. So it suits RISC OS moving onto future ARM chips for the foreseeable future. So that's part of the goal, is to just replace all of the ARM code in RISC OS with C. And there are some big, difficult projects within that, and there are some much smaller bite-sized projects. And every now and then we get someone showing an interest, quite often people who've seen some post out in the world that we've made or that someone else has made, and they've coming back to RISC OS from not having used it for a couple of decades in some cases, and suddenly they've got some time on their hands and they volunteer and get involved. And we can point them at different levels of challenge to suit their skill level. So one thing I did want to highlight is, since we launched the Moonshot, we've managed to collect together over £13,000, which is amazing, in donations from nearly 100 different donors. And most of that has come from the RISC OS community as it stands. So that's a fantastic show of support from everyone out there. And when we first launched Moonshot, we talked about having a target of about 2.5 million. And I think that was taken slightly out of context, in the sense of people thought if we don't hit 2.5 million, we won't do it. Whereas that's not true at all. What we see the Moonshots as is a whole series of steps towards an ultimate destination. And each of those steps is inherently valuable, even for RISC OS as it is now, let alone RISC OS of the future. And we don't have to get some mythical figure with that team of people working for a decade in order to achieve success. We can get lots of different successes along the route. So that's why all of these donations help, because they can just get us to the level where we can take the next step, the next significant step. So, for example, to complete the basic work, we've estimated it somewhere between another 20,000 to 30,000 pounds worth of work. And that's purely paying someone, potentially me, to pay my own bills for the time that I would have to take out of work in order to do all of that. But there's lots of other tasks in and around the Moonshots. So anyone else could end up claiming the first big step of this Moonshot pot. But I did want to just show you where we're going and how we're getting there, and just say thank you at this point to everyone who has shown their support already. So the first main topic of interest, I think, is to talk about LanManFS. So for those of you who don't know, LanManFS is part of the RISC OS software release that is published on the RISC OS Open website. And it has been built into the operating system for quite a while now. And it's part of a bigger package of software called OmniClient. And LanManFS allows you to transfer files back and forwards with other computers. So in a nutshell, that's what it's designed for. And this project is one of the existing RISC OS Open bounties, and it is essentially waking up this 28-year-old code base. When I was looking through the history, we saw it being moved into version control back in December 1998. So this code it's a bit long in the tooth, and it's only had a little bit of a tickle of maintenance over the last quarter of a century. And just as a bit of history, it's named after Microsoft's LAN manager, which was interesting. It was crushed by Novell NetWare back in the 90s and early 2000s, where there was a battle between, earlier than that even, there was a battle between the different network operating systems, network-enabled operating systems. But the LanMan name has stuck in RISC OS world, and it shows in a way how the whole code base has been stuck in stasis for 30 years. One of the things that LanMan is famous for is what was called the LM hash, which was famously terrible. It was a password scrambling scheme, which was basically a near perfect model of how you don't design a password hashing mechanism. So that led to lots of security problems and lots of exploits. And it basically caused a lot of consternation to anyone who used the SMB protocol over the years, because it had so many really obvious security holes. In the last probably 25 years, there've been maybe between 2 and a handful of commits to our source code, to our LAN manager source code. We've done very little in terms of just tittling a few things around the edges. So none of the fundamental security issues, none of the protocol issues have really been addressed over that time. And in the meantime, a lot of work has been happening at Microsoft to essentially move away from LAN Manager, the SMB protocol that LAN Manager supports. So just looking a bit forward into, looking a bit at the logic of why we decided to do this bounty. Microsoft, quite some time ago, decided that the protocol that LanManFS implements had to die. It was just a liability. And in May 2017, there was a massive global security event called WROCC. And that was essentially around 300,000 machines around the world were just owned by hackers. And it took the NHS down in the UK for quite a few days. And that was all due to security holes in the SMB protocol, which LanMan implements. And Microsoft in 2014 said they were deprecating that SMB protocol. Better late than never. And then they said it was going to be switched off by default in Windows 10 in 2017. And then they removed it entirely from Windows 11 Home in 2022. So if you wanted to use LanMan to talk to a modern Windows PC, it was getting increasingly difficult to the point of nearly impossible. And that actually explains my motivation for why I took this bounty on, because I had another guy from the community called Spro round in my office here, and he was sat next to me, and I was talking about wanting to transfer some files from my laptop, my Windows laptop, over to my Titanium. And we were looking at, let's just use LanMan and move it across. And he was talking me through how you had to change all your settings on Windows in order to get LanMan on RISC OS to connect to it. And it was basically switching off security everywhere. Every bit of security my Windows laptop had, I was just having to turn it down and turn it off. And eventually I got halfway through the process and just said to him, no, sorry, this is unacceptable. I just cannot do this to my laptop and open so many holes just so I can move some files. I'll use a USB stick. And so at that point, I realized we had this bounty open, and it had been open for quite a while. And it was a difficult one to bring LanMan up to speed, all the security side of it. And I thought, well, if I'm feeling this need, so must a lot of other people. And not everyone has the ability to actually go and solve the problem. So I felt like, why not give it a crack and take the bounty on? So next, I'm just going to show you some of the stuff that's been happening with LanMan. And forgive me, there's a lot of jargon here. I'm not going to explain it all. I'm just going to say I've had to learn a lot of weird terminology and acronyms over the last few months. And I've been reading a lot of standards and a lot of very dry, boring documents. And basically implementing all of that in the code base for LanManFS. And it does mean there's a couple of new libraries that I've had to add some of the security sides of the protocol. And I've made those deliberately separate from LanMan. So if other modern software needs to make use of those protocols, it can use those libraries. So it's not tied too tightly into LanMan itself. And I've also made use of some of the other work that's happened in the past in RISC OS, like ARM's embed TLS port that we've moved over to RISC OS some years ago. I'm now actually able to reap the benefits of all that hard work when that was done, because that was fundamentally required by LanMan's new protocol support. So lots of old code has been thrown in the bin, never to be seen again. Lots of horrible security holes have been removed, and lots of extremely complicated protocol has been added to LanMan. And the question now is, how does that get into people's hands, and what is the status of the project? So what we did was we opened up a public alpha, which was essentially a closed session, but we were inviting anyone from the public to join. And around 20 people got involved and volunteered, and they've all essentially joined the Slack channel, which is a chat application. And there's been a huge amount of support that I've had from all of those people. And it's allowed me to test on all kinds of environments that I don't personally have access to. So I've had people with different types of NAS, which is basically a network storage box, We've had people with different types of Mac, and we've had people with different vintages of Windows running on their PCs. So all of that has allowed me to test lots of edge cases and find lots of fun and exciting issues. Lots of ways different computers don't stick to the protocol and do their own thing. Mac OS. Yeah. So there's been loads of opportunities to make things work well on all those different systems and get us to a state where we feel like it's starting to work really well, and it's starting to be reliable, which is the fundamental thing that you want from a file system. If you're moving your data back and forth between machines, the last thing you want is for your data to get corrupted or lost or deleted by accident. So fortunately, we've not really seen much of that happening. Most of the issues have been weird things like folders not updating when you expect them to update, and you have to restart it to see them update. So all of those little niggles have been the things that we've been working on. I did take a bit of a pause on working on this project when some contract work arrived from elsewhere, because I needed to start paying some bills again, unfortunately. So I've been doing a bit of contract work, and then I'll be back tidying up LanManFS fairly soon. And that's the point where we will open up to a public beta. So what happens then is we're going to publish the LanManFS module as a beta on the RISC OS Open website. And we're going to open it up so that everyone out there is welcome to download it and try it out, and then send any issue reports back into us so that we can continue to refine it and polish it. And then once we're happy that it's fairly stable and people are comfortable with it, it will go into the rule nightly builds. So then all of the odd numbered RISC OS builds, 531, will be with LanManFS, the new LanManFS in them. And that should last for, hopefully for the coming months. There'll be a good period where people can test it even more. And then at the right moment, it will be released in one of the stable, even numbered RISC OS releases. So we're getting there. We've made huge progress on it over the last, well, in the initial 6 weeks, I think. It didn't take too long to get off the ground, maybe 2 months. But most of it was just a hugely valuable testing that was done by all the alpha testers. And there were people almost round the clock because I had such a broad audience all over the place. I was getting people testing it at all different times, and I'd make a new version of it and just chuck it over at one person. They go, yep, that's fixed this issue, or no, that's not fixed. And the amount of patience that they had to retest things over and over again has been fantastic. So it's been very enjoyable, and we're getting close to the point where everyone else can start getting their hands on it. A few side notes are that it will replace LanMan 98 as well as LanManFS. So for any of those people that have been using LanMan 98, which was certainly a better version of LAN Manager than LanManFS was, if anyone was using that, they will be able to use this one instead now. And you'll see all the benefits that you had in LanMan 98, plus it'll be a lot better. It will talk to a lot more machines. And hopefully this version will be a lot more better performing as well. On certain setups anyway, particularly against a Windows machine, it should be a lot faster. So even though the protocol's got miles more complicated, it should be a lot higher performance because of a lot of work that I've been doing on caching. So I look forward to a beta where I can start getting feedback from people. Okay, so the other thing that I was going to just mention or talk you through today is what's been happening with BASIC. And this is part of the Moonshot, essentially, because it's one of what we call the big six at RISC OS Open. We've identified 6 modules that are just monsters, and they're all written in hand-rolled assembler. And really, to have any hope of 64-bitting RISC OS, you have to clobber those 6. So they have to be replaced with C. And one of the big 6 is BBC Basic. And for those of you who aren't familiar, the background of BASIC is it's the language that was developed in 1964, so it's 62 years old now. And it was basically designed to help students program computers at Dartmouth College in the US. And then it was implemented by Sophie Wilson, who was at the time called Roger Wilson. It was implemented as BBC Basic in order to help Acorn release the BBC Micro into the UK education system. And BASIC was just the perfect language for the 1980s. It was easy to understand, easy to teach, and it had just enough structure that it made programming relatively straightforward. And it was also the processor, well, it was also the language that had an additional bit of power in that BBC Basic had the ability to write assembler directly in BBC Basic. So what's called inline assembler. And the fact that you could write assembler in BASIC was a really useful tool for people that wanted to write something that was really compact or really fast. For example, Elite was written in BASIC's assembler. So if you didn't know that, now you do. And Sophie Wilson back at Acorn modeled the first ARM chip with a BASIC program, which was allegedly around 800 lines long. I've seen lots of different numbers. They're all broadly 800 lines. So BASIC, interestingly, ran a model of the chip that was eventually going to have BASIC running on it. So that's a strange quirk. And in the end of the 80s, this is where the ARM chip started to launch and be used in Acorn's first desktop computers with ARM-based desktop computers. And so Sophie rewrote BASIC into BBC Basic 5. And that was essentially lots of very carefully, cleverly written ARM assembly language by the person, one of the people who invented the ARM chip. So if anyone knew how to use all the sneaky tricks, it was Sophie Wilson. And she certainly did. And Sophie also didn't like commenting code very much either, or formatting it. So it was very difficult to read and very difficult to understand, but it was very fast and very compact. And it added a lot of modern structures as well to the language. So it's still very powerful, and in many ways, you could write programs in BBC Basic and they would perform just as well as any other language. So it was really ahead of its time, I think. One thing that's in BBC Basic that people might not know is there is a secret build option in the source code. And if you know how to change that option, when you launch BASIC, this is what the banner says. And if you go to the RISC OS open sources at the moment, this is still there in the code. It's just switched off by default. And the challenge for anyone who's interested is to go and find where is that in the code. It's not obvious. So it's a very sneaky little hidden feature. Just to give a bit of background, I think about me and my motivation here. Why did I decide to work on this? One of the monsters. I've got a question mark here. Sometime in the 1980s, I got my first computer. I got an Acorn Electron. And I can't remember when that was, maybe 86, something like that. And I remember distinctly thinking, I am in the future now. I have got the future in my hands. And that's it. I don't need to learn how to write now because I'll be typing everything from now on. And I can just make this computer do everything. So I got the BBC Basic manual that came with my Electron, and I opened it to the bit where it said, right, line 10, print hello world. And I thought, oh, right, I see how you write programs. You just write a line number and then you write something for it to do. And so then I put the book back down and I wrote line 10, draw a cricket pitch line 20, draw the bowler, run. And then it just said mistake at line 10. And then brilliant, I was hooked. So I now had to figure out, why did that not work? How does this thing work? Maybe I should actually read that manual. And that was what got me into programming, was that first computer experience and believing that computers were the future. And then when I was graduating from my degree, there was only one place to send my CV to. It was Acorn. So in 97, I was offered a job at Acorn, and I was fantastically lucky that I got to move to Cambridge. I did the job interview, and they asked me, "Oh, are you proficient in C?" And of course, I'd only done BBC Basic and Pascal at university, so I said, "Yes, of course." Whereas the only thing I knew about C was it just had lots of squiggly brackets. So I just said, "Oh yeah, it's squiggly brackets, isn't it?" And somehow they gave me the job anyway. But not long afterwards, Acorn reinvented itself as Element 14, which was very short-lived. It was just part of some financial maneuverings, I think. And Pace Micro then purchased RISC OS from, they purchased Acorn and they purchased RISC OS with it. And they, not long after, they essentially made everyone redundant. So the long story short is, I worked at Acorn, sat at a desk. I then worked at Element 14, sat at the same desk. And then I worked at Pace, sat at the same desk. And then I was made redundant from Pace. But then I went freelance immediately. And then I ended up working, sat at the same desk at Pace again as a freelancer for a few months. So I got 4 different jobs, sat at the same desk doing the same thing, which was very odd. And eventually Castle bought RISC OS with BASIC in it from Acorn, from Pace. And not long after that, this is where I felt that RISC OS was essentially at risk of disappearing forever. If Castle went under and wasn't financially successful and RISC OS was their property and it was closed source, then that would essentially probably be the end and RISC OS would disappear. And so in 2006, I and 5 other people founded RISC OS Open and convinced Castle to publish RISC OS as open source. And then the open source release eventually over the years has gradually picked up steam. And we've got to the point now where pretty much all of the source code is available and it's open source, and anyone can look at bits of it and say, right, I'm going to improve this bit. And this is where I decided that the time was right to replace BASIC with something written in C. And so I agreed what the goals were with the other guys in RISC OS Open. And we wanted to make sure the result has to be open source, obviously. And it needs to be as compatible with ARM BASIC as it can be. So we wanted to make sure that any new version of BASIC doesn't immediately cause all of people's existing BASIC programs to not work. That would be ridiculous. We also wanted to make it run on as broad a selection of machines as possible. So even to the point where I can run my version of BASIC on Windows if I want at the moment. So it could potentially be ported all over the place, but really the main job is to make it run on RISC OS. And unlike the ARM version of it, the whole point is to make it maintainable. So people have to be able to read this source code and understand it and maintain it and add features to it and just make it into a richer, better language in the future. And it's far, far easier if you write the code with that in mind from the beginning than just try to rewrite some assembly language in C. But at the same time, we want it to perform well and be compact. But I don't want that. I don't want high performance to be the thing that causes me to make it so it's hard to understand or impossible to maintain, which is, I think, the critique you could level at a lot of the ARM code in RISC OS. So why is this so hard? it is over 24,000 lines of code. And if you just look at that, you don't, even if you can understand ARM code, that's hard to understand. But if you can't understand ARM code, you can see it's clearly gobbledygook. And you can see even the comments, the few comments that are there, here follows DJS's disgusting code. It literally is mad. You just sit there not understanding how it works. And so there's a hard intellectual job just to understand how it works. And then the other side of it is, how do I implement this in a way that's more understandable and more maintainable? And because of the way it's written, it's very hard to extend the language. So if you want to do strings that are longer than 256 bytes, or if you want to add long integers, or you want to add structures to BASIC, it's just prohibitively difficult. You can just see from the history of the BASIC language how few new features were added to the language over the years because of the way it's written. It's just so difficult to extend and maintain. And they're also very different. There's several different builds of the BASIC module in RISC OS, whereas realistically, it would be nice to just have one code base that just builds everything. And that's what compilers are designed for. So that's why writing in C is so beneficial. I did look at some of the projects that are already out there that have written versions of BBC Basic or versions of Basic in C. And for various reasons, I ruled them out as starting points. So I could go into that, but it's mostly technical. But in the end, I decided the best approach was to just take the BBC reference manual as gospel. So that is the truth of what the basic language is. And the second truth was to, if I was unsure and the manual didn't say something, to write a basic program to test it and run it on basic and see what happens, and to learn through inspection. And as much as possible, not to look at the source code at all of basic. I mean, I was very familiar with basic 20 odd years ago, but fortunately I've forgotten it all now. So I think a much cleaner approach is to look at what the intent of the language is written in the manual, and see its actual behavior, and then think, what is the best way to make that happen by implementing it in C? And the other thing is, how do I make that happen in C in a way that someone else could walk along later and read the same code and go, oh, I see how that works. Yeah. So it's got to be well commented, and it's got to be well formatted, and it's got to be easy to understand. And in this version of BASIC, I want to be able to say whether we have 32-bit or 64-bit numbers. And that's important because it's a breaking change. So you can choose which one you have. If you use 32-bit numbers, which is what the traditional BASIC used for integers, then all of your existing programs should work fine. But as soon as you say integers can be bigger than that, there's a high risk that a lot of existing programs will break. So you want to make that an option that you can choose when you start a BASIC program. Am I a forward-looking one, or am I a legacy one? And the same with floating point numbers as well. So where have I got to? Well, I spent about 9 months on it, and the stuff on the left is what's all working fine. And the stuff on the right is all the things that I haven't got around to yet. And one of the things that I did do in the background was I studied how BASIC behaves with a lot of the things on the right. So I've now got a good handle on how I should implement the stuff on the right, but I just don't have the time to do the stuff on the right, because as you can imagine, if you're retired and you're the breadwinner in a family, you can't easily take 18 months out of earning any money when you've got all the bills coming in. So I did what I could in the first half of this project based off a very kind donation from someone in the community who actually donated £25,000 to RULE to do that. and I eked out £25,000 over 9 months. And then the next part of the project, I reckon, is about the same again. So it's about the same size of work to come. And I'm not sure I could even afford to do it for that little and if it took another 9 months. But that's to be decided. So hopefully that gives you a sense of how things have been progressing, and is basically what that all means in actual tasks. So RISC OS at the moment just runs as an application. It doesn't run as a relocatable module. So that's just some under the hood plumbing that needs to change. I'm not doing inline assembler support at the moment, but it will do eventually. And one of the most important things is that's going to be separate and modular, because it's bad enough now where you're trying to support all the variants of ARM that we've had in BASIC so far. But when you go up to 64-bit, it all explodes, and you've got VFP, you've got Neon, you've got all the different feature sets in 64-bit that are supported. And really, you need the assembler to be a separate thing that you can choose almost at runtime. I want to assemble some 32-bit ARM code or 64-bit ARM code, or maybe even some x64. So the idea is that there will be separate assemblers that you can call into from BASIC, but it's still written as inline assembler in BASIC. At the moment, there's not much in the way of testing. It's all been ad hoc testing, and there's no error handling in particular. It just breaks out of a program and says there's an error, and that's it. So you can't catch errors, and you can't make your program keep going when something goes wrong. And there's loads of other features that aren't implemented as well. I've listed a few here. If you want a quick look at how it looks, here's an example of how the new BASIC looks when running on RISC OS Titanium. And this is, in this particular version, I've started it in 64-bit integer mode with 8-byte floats, so 64-bit floats as well. And you can see there where it lists a% equals, that's a very big number. That's because it's a 64-bit integer. So it all works the same as BASIC would work, except your numbers can be a lot bigger. And one of the things I would like to do once this project's done is a whole slew of language improvements like long strings. So I'd love to be able to have strings that can be just as long as you want. For example, load a file into a string. That would be nice. And it does also run on Windows. I did say that. So here's how that looks. So you can see here, it's running in a PowerShell terminal there. It's nice and colorful. So that's one of the things that I did add to this version of BASIC is you can have lots of different colors in its outputs, which requires some changes to the task window module as well. But you can see there a very simple example where I've just drawn a circle, and that's just drawn a circle in another window. So that's allowed me to do some testing very conveniently because I happen to be doing all my programming on Windows. And having LanManFS has been very handy for moving stuff back and forth between Windows and RISC OS. And some of the fringe benefits of this work. So I spotted a bug in the original BASIC while I was doing some of my nefarious testing. And so that has been fixed. So that fix got rolled out into the RISC OS source tree quite a while ago. And then another thing that I did was I added a new feature to the language, which is currently in beta, but it's there again. It's in the published RISC OS. So, the published RISC OS sources. So you can use the sys keyword as a function now to get at lots of stuff that otherwise you would have to write lots of grotty inline assembler or weird hacks to try and get at. So this can tell you stuff about system information, or it can do SWI lookups, all kinds of stuff. So that's very handy. And the other fringe benefit was, as I was ploughing through the hundreds of pages of basic reference manual, I was also scribbling on them all and saying, that's wrong, that's missing some information, or that's just really hard to understand and needs rewriting. And so at the end of the whole process, I ended up with a manual that was pretty much every other page had scribbles on it. So the guys at Rule said, why don't you just update the manual? And so the side project was that I went and created a new issue of the reference manual, which corrects all of those. And that was published, I don't know, about 6 months ago now. So you can buy that from the Rule website if you want, or you can even download it for free as a PDF. But there you go. Lots of errata and bugs fixed in the manual, which is just it's an indication that these projects deliver something useful even as they're happening, not necessarily when they get to completion. And this basic work is a perfect example of how we think the moonshots can work, in that we're doing some work that's going to help 64-bit RISC OS, but the outcome is something that works on 32-bit RISC OS as well. You get the benefit of the new basic on RISC OS now. You don't have to wait for a 64-bit RISC OS to get the new basic. So that's the nature of how we want to implement these bits of moonshot steps. And that is all. So hopefully there's something useful in there for you all, and something new and interesting. Thank you.
And I think there's a question on the chat.
Okie doke. So yes, LanManFS will run on older versions of RISC OS. It runs back to 3.6, 3.7, something like that. And is it supporting SMB3? So yes, 3.0. SMB2 and SMB3 are really the same thing. There's just more options. So it's not like SMB3 is a fundamentally different protocol to SMB2. It's just a different name that Microsoft are using for SMB2 with some extra features. But there are some deliberate new features that I haven't implemented yet, which are hellishly complicated and hard work for a processor to do. So they will hurt performance. And frankly, they're not necessary for adding much in the way of better security to the protocol. And they're not anything that Microsoft has said, if you don't have this stuff, we'll be switching off support in the foreseeable future. So I don't feel the urgency to do some of those extra SMB 3.0.1 or 3.1, I think it is, some of those features there. So I've drawn a line about SMB 3.0, and that's where it goes to. But that should be good for at least the next decade, 15 years. What modern versions of Windows will it interface with? All of them. So I'm using Windows 11 here, and there's people using, it depends what you mean by modern. How far back do you want to go? Windows 7 will probably be fine. I'm not going to say anything about Vista. Just don't make me talk about Vista. Yep, no problem. Any other questions?
I've still got an XP machine running here. Is that any good?
Oh, you'll be a very welcome tester. You'll be able to use existing LanManFS with that.
Maybe not.
No, I wouldn't advise anyone to, if you've got some machines like NAS's in particular, tend to only have SMB1 support for cheap reasons. But even those, I think, are gradually migrating away from it. One thing, because no one asked, but I'll say it anyway, one thing that I have noticed between all the different platforms is Windows does implement the protocol much better and much more faithfully than other operating systems. In particular, Macs, Apple Macs, they use extensions of the protocol that are Mac specific and undocumented. So it works amazingly between Macs using SMB if you've got a Mac on both ends. But if you've got LanManFS, all of the stuff that should work, that would be nice, doesn't work. So what I mean by that in particular is the stuff that tells you when something has changed on the server so that you can refresh your filer windows doesn't work on the Mac. So it's very irritating. I can't tell you how many weeks of work I spent trying to make Macs work reliably in that sense. And I gave up because they're just not supporting the parts of the protocol that you require to make that work. They're doing it through their own side channel. So, and I'm not about to reverse engineer some unpublished protocol. So I'll let them do it. What I did right instead was one screen full of BASIC that you can just run in the background, and it refreshes your filer windows for you every so often. If they're LanManFS windows. So that was my lazy cheat. Do you have many actual BASIC programmers out there? Just wondering.
I used to do an awful lot, but nothing very sophisticated for the last 15 years.
Yeah.
20 years.
Yeah. I feel like it's got a lot of potential. If we add structures, long strings, and a few other bits and pieces, I think BASIC could be quite nice. Dave still uses it. Yeah. I think if you look on RISC OS Open's website, we've got a section where I've sketched out some ideas what the future of BASIC might look like, and some example programs of what you could do if you had, for example, structures. And it would make writing WIMP applications so much nicer without having to worry about buffers and indirected pointers and all that nonsense. So yeah, it's good. There's quite a few people chipping in. Very nice. Well, it's good to see it's still being used.
64-bit integers is one of the steps necessary to do 64-bit file pointers, so you can handle big files or huge files. Indeed,
yeah. You'd have a bit of a nightmare doing that in BASIC at the moment. But it is a breaking change. There's no getting away from it being a breaking change, because there's certain stuff like BASIC's workspace where even in the manual it tells you certain offsets are certain things, like pointers like page and top and all that good stuff. And suddenly those things become 64-bit values, and all the addresses change and the offsets change. So there will be certain amount of stuff, if it's grotting around and digging around in those internals, certain amount of BASIC programs will have to be fixed when a 64-bit BASIC comes out. That's unavoidable. But if C BASIC is built as a 32-bit BASIC, then it will continue to work the way you would expect it to work.
I remember back in the days of Microsoft BASIC in the 1980s. It's a slightly different thing, but arrays could be started based at 0 or 1, and they had a statement that you could put in, preferably at the start of the program, option-based 0 or option-based 1. And maybe that's the sort of thing that you can put in there to a statement that allows you to switch to a particular size of BASIC.
It sounds like an enormous foot gun to me, but yes, those sorts of things do become much more straightforward to do.
Yeah, I mean, it's just the principle of it rather than the detail of it.
Yeah, absolutely.
But I mean, one thing I'd like to do is congratulate you on what you've managed to achieve so far. I mean, that looks like an enormous amount of stuff.
Thank you.
You know, very long. You've made very big inroads into an enormous project.
Yeah, I think it could have been less enormous if I'd have done a faithful, let's just look at what the ARM code does and just write like ARM code in C. But I would have ended up with something that no one can understand. It become even less understandable than the assembler version. And that actually is one of the reasons why I was looking at BBC Basic for Windows. And Richard Russell has done an amazing job with that. And it's, for what it is, it's brilliant. But the thing that I was unhappy about was it is essentially, it's like he's written assembler in C. So he's just got some registers, some variables that he's calling registers, and he's just writing assembler in C. And for me, that just felt like, I can see why you do it, and it's going to compile very elegantly. But for your average programmer in the community who's going to come along and contribute to an open source project, it's another barrier, another intellectual barrier between them and success.
It does rather defeat the object, doesn't it? I mean, the whole idea of a high-level language is to lift it higher, just abstract it from all the messy detail that actually has become very, very difficult as ARM processors have grown.
Yeah, and just using features like structures in C just adds a lot of value. A lot of late nights, coffee and pot noodles. Yeah, that sounds about right.
Typical programmer.
Yeah. I think at the moment I've been doing a lot of, because I'm self-employed at the moment and doing contract work, it means I'm dictating my own working pattern, which at the moment seems to be start work around 12. Well, get up around 11, start work at about 12, and then finish work sometime about 3 in the morning. And somewhere in the middle, watch an England game, or maybe even, dare I say it, step out of the house. Crazy talk.
Well, eat something occasionally.
Oh, well, occasionally, yeah. I start typing, and then I realise it's gone dark, and think, oh, I should probably have some food.
General
That's why
question.
my BBC Micro got nicknamed the TARDIS, because I'd sit down at it, and 5 minutes later, it was 3.5 hours later.
Yeah, sounds familiar. Sorry, Chris.
Sorry, general question about the Moonshot. I think the have you got, did that figure you showed include the doubling up, whatever it was?
Yes.
It does, right.
Yeah, I think it does. Yes, it should do. I think we've updated the totalizer since that. So for those who didn't know, we had someone who said that they would match every donation up to a certain total. And we ran that for a fixed period up until RISC OS Open's 20th birthday, which was a couple of weeks ago. And so we had quite a lot of donations during that period, and we just doubled them all up. And the other thing that we're doing at the moment is we've applied for several different grants. And the good thing about some of these grant schemes is even if you fail, we have learned, you can quite often just turn around and resubmit with a reworded application. So you can learn from your failures and try again and just go for a different emphasis or a different, slightly different remodeled outcome. So these grants could be quite pivotal as well in terms of supporting some of these big steps that we want to take.
Did you see? I think there were some extra questions, and have you seen them all?
I've not seen any more questions yet, but I've seen a lot of positive comments, which has been great. I should probably say when. When is the LanManFS beta going to start? So that's kind of on me. I was saying that I've got some project work at the moment, some contract work, which has taken me away from LanManFS. What I was in the middle of doing when I stopped, because most of the bugs were squashed at that point, is I had done, if you're familiar with how you do software development with something like Git, you make some changes to the code and then you commit it into Git, and then you make some more changes and commit them on top, and commit and commit, commit. I'd done several hundred commits of work on LanManFS on multiple different branches, and it was all very messy and confusing. It was important for me while I was doing it, but it was not something I want to release in the public Git history, because it would just be an unintelligible mess of stuff happening. So I was working through that and squashing it all down and tidying it all up and reordering a few things. And that's actually very painful and boring. But when I've got to the end of that, we should have the history down to something like maybe 20 discrete steps from where the code base was to where it's finished-ish, as finished as software ever is. So that should be logical steps like getting rid of NetBIOS and getting rid of this and getting rid of that, and then adding this. So it'll be a much more clear narrative of how the project was performed. So yeah, that process alone is probably going to take a few weeks of concerted effort. And then I'll be able to release the sources. Oh, Chris, you're muted if you're speaking to me. I don't know if Chris is speaking to me.
Chris, you're muted.
Chris, are you trying to speak to Steve? Because if so, you're muted.
No, he's broken.
Technology,
eh? So we've got a few people here that have been on the LanMan alpha testing, haven't we?
Yep, me included.
Yep. Ah, Martin's been one of those late night helpers.
Yeah. With the Mac in particular.
Yep. You were outlasting me some days.
Yes. Yeah, I don't sleep very well, so I'm up pretty late. So
Yeah.
I was a perfect candidate for doing some testing.
Oh, thank you for all the help. It's been great.
No, it's
Sorry.
been good fun. It's been good fun.
Chris, you've been on mute. Sorry. If you were talking to us, we couldn't hear you.
Yeah, sorry, I don't know why it didn't work, but I was asking about the thing LanManFS you very much work for. Is it a server type version, or do we need to look at this ShareFS server that's being developed by somebody else as an option to sort of bridge it? There used to be a Samba server, but it doesn't really work.
Yeah.
Anymore.
There's no plan for that at the moment, but I was looking at it and mulling over how hard can it be once you've done LanManFS to just write a LanMan server. The famous last words, how hard can it be? I could be tempted, but I know that would end up, the debugging stage takes weeks, if not months. So if you have a bounty that's £4,000 and you stretch it out into a 6 month piece of work, it's not paid very many bills. So the server would probably have to be another bounty if it was to happen, I think. Or someone else might want to take it on, because the libraries that get published as part of LanMan sources are doing quite a bit of the heavy lifting in the protocol now. So the server side shouldn't be as hard to figure out. But yeah, there's no concrete plan to do any server side at the moment.
Fair enough. we looking at a newer version of a new stable version of RISC OS soon, or that? Or next year's plan, or
that's a cheeky question. I'm not talking about RISC OS.
We're on the spot now.
Yeah, we were hoping to build towards a stable release before the end of this year, was the timeline that we had in our heads. And that might still be possible. I think realistically it's unlikely. Well, I don't see BASIC making it into that.
Yeah.
And LanMan, we're in July now, and time flies. LanMan might just have enough time to get through beta and into a stable release for then. For what is it, 5.3.2? But it may just miss the cut. Hopefully it doesn't, because it's so useful. I think everyone will end up running the beta anyway if we.
Yeah.
I'm assuming most of the window manager stuff that's being worked on as well is going to miss the 5.3.2 as well, because that's quite a big job, isn't it?
Some of it, like a lot of theme related stuff, will make it, I'm pretty sure. But yeah, we're still aiming for the 5.3.2 the end of this year, but it's what's going to be in it and doesn't make the cut is not entirely clear yet.
Yeah, because my dark mode theme relies on the new release coming out, so I can't release mine until 5.3.2.
So I think most of what you need will be in it. So I think that's
okay.
That's.
I have been downloading the dark mode source code, and when Spro's been updating it, I have been testing it out. And feeding back anything that looks odd.
I think I would have Spro round at my house, angrily shouting at me if it didn't make the cut, because he's championing all the dark mode stuff.
It's coming along really nice.
Yeah, it looks great. So I like the fact it's enabled you to do all your stuff as well. Brilliant.
Yeah, it's been fun working on the themes, and the feedback's been really positive as well. It's given a new lease of life into an old operating system, which is good.
Yeah. I'm going to have to drop off fairly soon.
Okay.
Anyone else got any questions or feedback even?
That's why. So I've just found out why my sound wasn't working.
Cameron's got his hand up.
Yeah. Just a quick. Oh, sorry, Cameron. Go ahead.
You first.
Hello.
Oh.
Oh wait, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Chris can go first.
Oh. Okay. All I'm going to quickly ask is much work being done on some of the bugs that I keep seeing on the bug list? Because some of them seem to be pretty old. Somebody go through them on a routine basis and clear up some of the old bugs.
Occasionally, but not necessarily. Not usually the rule guys. The rule guys don't have much bandwidth for that. But the bugs are all there for everyone to see. So if there's any developers out there with a bit of spare time, that's not a bad idea, because they're usually fairly bite-sized jobs compared to 64-bitting some big module. So that's maybe something we should publicize a bit more on the rule forums, that we'd like more volunteers to help with bug fixing.
Fair enough.
Yeah. Cameron.
Do you have any advice on how to get started with the with the beta version? Because I have been trying it, but I haven't been able to connect. But I haven't been able to connect to any service I wasn't able to before.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. So the new LanManFS.
Yeah.
If you drop me a line, are you on Slack?
Yes.
Yeah. So if you can drop me a line on Slack, we can have a chat there. But yeah, if you've already made all your servers talk to the existing LanManFS, then the experience you're going to get is going to be very similar. Apart from LanManFS didn't support long file names, I don't think.
What I meant is that I can connect to my existing server, but I haven't been able to connect to any of the new shares I've created on Windows or Mac.
Ah, right, okay. Well, in which case, that is a classic debugging task of looking at logs and seeing what's going on from the LanManFS side. And that way I'd be able to figure out why it's not connecting. But I think nearly everyone else in the alpha at the moment, I've not seen that report anymore from people for a long time. So it could be some weird networking glitch, some router problem that's blocking a certain type of traffic. I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So yeah, drop me a line on Slack and I'll see if I can advise.
Okay. Also, sorry if this was covered earlier on while I wasn't here, but which versions of RISC OS which versions of the RISC OS will this work on?
Yeah, so it goes back to I haven't tried it on 3.6, but I think it should work on 3.6. Definitely 3.7.
It is working on.
Sorry, it is working.
It's working on 3.6.
Good. Yeah. Because there's some changes around 3.6, 3.7, like OS dynamic error or something like that. That was a feature I was using, but I think I put some backward compatibility layer in to make sure it worked on an older version. Mm. So yeah, I wouldn't dare go further back than 3.6, but if it's definitely confirmed, then that's good.
Yeah, I've tried 3.5 and 3.1. It definitely doesn't work on those two.
Mm-hmm.
I've heard reports from other people that the changes to get rid of the assembler back in February was enough to get NFS to work on RISC OS 3.1. So it'd be interesting if the new stuff, if the beta stuff is able to work there as well.
Yeah, some of the veneers maybe. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I can have a look, but it's not really been. That wasn't in scope for the work to make it go back earlier than it already did.
Mm-hmm.
So. Yeah, if I find myself at a loose end when I'm back working on LanManFS, I'll have a quick look at that.
Okay.
But yeah, the design goal was definitely 3.6. I think 3.5 is a bonus. Sorry, yeah, is that right? Is that right? Yeah, yes.
I just have one quick question before you shoot off, and it's not related. Well, it is kind of related to some of this, but I want to talk about DDE quickly.
Mm-hmm.
Back, I think a while ago, there used to be a cross-compiler version that used to work in Linux.
Yes.
DDE. Back in 2022, it was discontinued.
It was never sold by us or released by us because the ARM license never let us. So we can build a cross-compiler.
Okay.
But ARM, their license prevents anyone from distributing that. And if anyone does have a copy, it's a bootleg.
Right. Okay. Because the only thing that I noticed is that when you try and cross-compile with GCC, for instance, I get quite a few C99 sort of errors crop up, which requires the newer Norcroft 587, is it, I believe, we're up to?
Yeah, right. Okay.
Especially if you're using modules in CMunge or
Mhm.
You know, the default one that you use, it complains about it.
Yeah.
And I knew there was a version that kind of floated around, but I've not actually seen it being
Yeah.
used anywhere. So I just
Yeah.
wondered if there was any way around that in Linux, because obviously I want to try and compile stuff away from RISC OS if I can.
Yeah, the trick we had to do with the rule nightly builds and all that stuff was we just run a headless copy of our PCMU with the DDE installed in it.
Oh, that's a good idea.
So that just
Yeah, I didn't think of that.
does the trick. It's clunky, but it works.
Okay. Well, obviously with the new, I could probably do a headless version because I've got the TI emulator now, so I should be able to do it on that. That might be a bit quicker.
Yeah. Yep.
For the GCC stuff, did you see the stuff I posted on the forums a couple of weeks ago?
The Docker, yeah, I've got that. I've got that
Okay.
running. But it still complains about the C99 stuff, so I don't know whether that's directly linked to a couple of the modules that I'm building or.
Well, see, GCC, the version of GCC you use does support does support C99. You just have to, it's just not in it's just doesn't default to it like later versions do.
Okay, all right, I'll have a look at it. Because I had an attempt of converting the display manager over to C, which I've now got a working version of it.
Ooh, nice.
I did post it in Slack, Steve, but I don't think you've seen it.
Is that something you sent yesterday?
No, it's about a week ago.
Oh, sorry.
I'll send you the link to the source because obviously that's now working and running.
Yeah. Anyone who's talking to me about LanManFS got parked.
Okay,
Right.
any more general questions for Steve? All gone quiet now. Okay, I'll stop recording at this point.